Welcome to Life on the Rocks, your innovative, entrepreneurship, and motivational-based show where we ask the real questions by tapping into the minds of successful, high-performing individuals. I'm going to predicate to you that luck is an illusion, disproving the myth that there's a such thing as an overnight success. Get ready and strap in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming at you live from episode 62 of Life on the Rocks with your host, Connor LaRocque. Today's featured guest in the hot seat is Mr. Toby Simpson. Toby, how are you today?
I'm very good, thanks.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you in the hot seat this afternoon. For anybody who doesn't know Mr. Toby Simpson, he is the co-founder and CTO of Fetch AI, which we're going to get into. He was also the former creator of Creatures, which was a massive hit video game in the 1990s. And he was also the head of software design for a company called DeepMind, which actually sold to Google. And for your own sake, just to build some context, you've also been featured in Forbes, Business Insider. The first question I want to ask you, Toby, today is, can you explain Fetch AI in the most simplistic terms so people get a feel for what this technology is and what it does?
Yeah, we're building an economic internet. This is the world in which the things in the economy of things can get stuff done for you. And this is important because increasingly our digital lives are incredibly complex. There's an awfully large amount of moving parts there, and they're very, very difficult for us to organize. And actually trying to manage that number of bits and pieces from the top down is actually really, really difficult.
Right.
We thought, wouldn't it be kind of cool if we gave the authority to solve a problem to all of those individual parts so that they could actually get on with it, independent of any human intervention?
Right. How is this going to affect our everyday lives? So being that it's so complex, like how is this, can you break it down, like give us an example of an industry this is going to affect, just to build context?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, just to wind the clock back a bit, about a decade ago, one of the other co-founders and I were talking about this very problem. And whether or not it would be possible to build a world big enough to actually have everything represented in it. And when I say everything, I mean every piece of data, every piece of hardware, segments of infrastructure, services, people, the whole lot. And if we could have all of those bits and pieces represented by a digital entity with its own goals and ability to deliver things and get things, then we'd have a really interesting way of presenting the economy. Right. That actually all of those individual bits and pieces could work together to solve big, complicated problems. And the kind of big, complicated problems we were thinking of are things like transportation. Transportation is a great example. Even today, with all these wonderful apps you have to poke around and find out what's going on with traffic, you still have to look at multiple applications in order to get from one place to another.
Right.
And I feel that, isn't it about time, with all this amazing computing power, that actually the computers did the work for us, so that the solutions were presented directly to us without us having to dig through things in order to find them. Because so much of life these days feels like pushing hot water uphill and square pegs in round holes. It'd be nice if the machines started doing that for us.
I think that's actually a massive point too, where a lot of people, they don't realize the actual power you have even on your phone. You know, you have access to all this information, this technology that's quite powerful. Whereas, you know, can you imagine 50 years ago? So one of the questions I want to ask you then, geared towards your technology, like how do you start a company like this? Like you guys didn't go down the regular Silicon Valley route. You guys are going into somewhat, would you say, the cryptocurrency market and Bitcoin blockchain market? That's where Fetch AI is taking place?
Yeah, and this is an interesting one because we didn't start out looking at the decentralized ledger space and the blockchain space and thinking, let's build a business using this. We actually already had a problem that we wanted to solve and that we've been trying to solve for, with discussions over a decade. And really what it came down to is, how do we get the scale? I mean, how do we make a world that's big enough to put all of those representatives in? Because we're talking potentially tens or hundreds of billions of these little entities. And the existing technology that I was familiar with from building massively multiplayer virtual worlds just couldn't scale to that kind of level. And it was actually decentralized ledger technology that was sort of one of the keys to the puzzle, because we looked at this and thought, oh, now this is cool, because now we can distribute the effort of running a world over all of these computers without having to trust any individual computer. And that was cool, because that meant that we could get the scalability. But much more importantly, we would have access to all of that computing power that we could use to do cool things for the users of the network.
Right. What are some of the barriers you guys are going to face as you're kind of bringing this to scale in the marketplace? Because I know there's a lot of backlash, in the cryptocurrency space, and I know people will be thinking there's kind of a lot of it's, I guess, a skepticism. So, what are some of the barriers you guys are running into, maybe as a company?
Skepticism about that space, of course, is a very broad subject. And one of the things that the decentralized ledger space offers as a piece of technology is the ability to shift control from the centers of the network out to the individuals. Now, this is actually quite an important shift. Because at the moment, all of your stuff, all of your things, and all of the power that you would have is actually existing in a small, surprisingly small, and shrinking number of large centralized entities. But when you actually redistribute that power to the individual and give control over the value that can be generated to the individual, then that's quite an interesting change. Of course, it's also, as a decentralized piece of technology, it's not under the control of any given entity. And as a result of that, it's very difficult to shut down. It's very inclusive, and pretty much anybody and anyone can get involved in it. So actually, there's a lot to like about that space, quite apart from the fact that the general idea of decentralizing and distributing the effort of solving some of these problems introduces a whole raft of new potential solutions and new ways of tackling some of the complexity that we're drowning in. And that's great for people. And of course, as we know, any really cool technology, the idea is that you don't really notice it's there. It's like magic. It's meant to just make your life better without you having to worry about how it's been done. And anything like this, you want to hide all of that complexity. You just want it to work when people want to make use of it.
Right. I think that's super important. I think it's a lot of things that you see that at first they get a little bit of restraint, and then all of a sudden you don't even realize it. Like something like Uber, look at how it took over the marketplace. Where the only place you go now, Vancouver is the only one that they kind of boycotted it. But for the most part, everywhere else, like if you're in Uber or Lyft, it's just become such a central part of our everyday lives. Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very interesting to note with businesses like that what they're actually doing is they're connecting somebody who wants something to somebody who has something. And they're providing the trust mechanism that sits in the middle in order to facilitate that connection. And one of the things that we're doing with Fetch, and I refer to Fetch quite often as the ultimate dating agency for value providers,
right.
it's there to learn how to connect an agent that represents something with an agent that wants it or might want it. And it's actually that might want, which is kind of cool. So from that perspective, what Fetch is doing in a decentralized way is it is acting as a self-service trust mechanism and potentially sitting where existing intermediaries currently sit in the economy and providing a different kind of way of connecting people together, but a way that potentially leaves a lot more of the power and the ability to collect the value with the individuals.
Right. How is this going to affect the job market? Let's say, so people within the transportation industry, like just being from a logistical standpoint, how is this going to cause a mass disruption? And sorry for my ignorance, just trying to get a really good understanding, because this is quite a complex technology you have on your hands here to understand.
Yeah, and I guess if there's one thing that's common about history is the scope of jobs that humans do has been a constantly shifting thing.
Right.
And you introduce new technologies, and potentially some jobs change and new ones are created. That's just the way things are. I wouldn't say that something like this is potentially a huge disruptor of that. I think that what it's much more likely to do is to change the role of intermediaries in the economy, but also
Right.
give a lot more power to access, particularly AI and machine learning knowledge, effectively, give the access of that knowledge to the individuals. And that puts a lot more power over you, your life, and your stuff with you. And I would argue that's quite a cool thing, because you can generate value from stuff at the moment that you don't generate any value about. And you mentioned earlier that we carry around these mobile phones and the huge amount of computing power. Sometimes I wonder if we realize just how much computing power that actually is. And your phone is full of interesting sensors, all sorts of things that you're carrying around with you that aren't generating any value for you, except when you're specifically using them. But there's interesting stuff there. And why shouldn't you generate value from that? So one example that I've used is if a whole pile of people suddenly put their phones away on a street, the chances are it's just started raining. That might be useful to somebody who's just round the corner. That kind of very, very local information that they might be prepared to pay a hundredth of a cent for. And that kind of stuff all adds up. And if you can represent all of these sensors and all of these devices, with these autonomous economic agents, our digital entities that exist in the Fetch world, then just as you go around your daily life, you're generating value from all of these sensors, be it in your vehicle or in your device or all of the things that you have in your home. And that potentially changes all of that. And instead of somebody else collecting that value, it's you. So your stuff is yours.
I think that's actually a really good point. I think that's awesome to see the kind of the shift in the marketplace. And so as they're collecting all this data through your agents, talk about the fetch token. So you guys have a token that represents a lot of this, and that's how they do transactions. Can you, like, again, I want to say from my standpoint, so for my audience to understand. So what is this fetch token, and how do you make transactions with it, so you get that information, access to that information, like you've been talking about?
Yeah, because of course, I come from a computer games background,
Right.
and we're all used to creating artificial currencies and tokens and things like that inside computer games, because of course you need things to work in a very specific way,
Right.
and control over those virtual economies in order to be able to make them work. And actually, it's not that far detached to the kind of scenario that we've got here, in that the fetch system involves a very, very large number of very small transactions. And
Right.
you can't apply that to an existing currency because this is a global network. So you end up with problems then that the cost of actually performing the transactions in existing currencies exceeds the value of them. And of course, you can't have that happen. You need to be able to do things that maybe are a thousandth of a cent or less, and for the transaction cost to be effectively zero in order to be able to facilitate that. So actually having some kind of currency or value exchange method on the network itself is extremely important,
Right.
because it also forms a key part of the incentive model. Because this is a decentralized network. It's not like I run it. I can't switch it off if I want to. Anybody is free to download the software and set up and be a computer on the Fetch network, and then potentially collect value by delivering services to all these digital entities. So because anybody can do that, and they can be anywhere when they do it, we need to be able to create an incentive model that works for all those that are involved.
Right.
And that kind of thing is really practical when you have your own unit of value exchange. So that's what the Fetch token is for. It's there for when you're connecting to the network. It's there for when you're accessing the prediction system and the trust system. It's there when your digital entities are moving around the network and building a picture of the world that they can use and make sense of. And it's there for all of these value exchanges. And of course, what's interesting about it is a lot of the exchanges that take place aren't between humans and these entities. They're between the entities and the entities.
Right.
Now, it may be that by the time you get something delivered to your phone that's solving a problem that you have, that many thousands of these agents, these digital entities, have been transacting in order to make that possible.
Wow.
But of course, from a human perspective, you want to hide this stuff. I mean, one of the things that the crypto space has found quite difficult to do is to make it accessible. You know, when you're in it and you know how it works, it seems obvious. But to people outside, it actually doesn't seem obvious. And there's all this stuff you have to do, and the words are all wrong. So when they talk about wallets, the concepts involved in that, you sort of think, oh, it's a wallet. But it doesn't work like that internally. And some of the things that the words that we use don't necessarily match the reality of it. And in a thing like Fetch, in a world like Fetch, you want to hide all of this stuff. So if you want to pay for something in a currency that you're familiar with, the fact that then gets automatically converted into tokens, gets involved in 10,000 miniature transactions, then convert it back, you can hide all of that stuff in order to make it accessible. But you still need that token underneath the hood in order for everything to work on the network.
Right. That's complex, but that actually makes a lot of sense. So, and just again, trying to figure this out from a context point. So could somebody like myself, I can go out into the cryptocurrency market and purchase a coin like Fetch?
Yeah, you could.
Right.
And there are different ways of doing that, of course. And one of the ways of getting hold of Fetch tokens is to download the software, set yourself up as a computer on the network, and then deliver value to agents that might connect you or need the services that you're providing. And you then become a part of the global computing network that fetches. You build all of its predictions and its trust mechanisms and everything else that those individual agents need in order to be able to do business effectively. And this is an interesting part of Fetch. In fact, there's two interesting parts. One is this whole business of predictions. Predictions are super important. And access to them and giving access to them to all of the users of the network is very important. It's knowing what's going to happen in the future or what's likely to happen, because that allows you to make really interesting decisions. But also, this is a world that's very big. And it's potentially got many, many billions of these agents in it. And if you go into a world like that, you can't sort through that kind of stuff yourself. You want to open your eyes in this space and see something that's relevant just to you. And of course, you can do this in the digital world. This is almost a magical world, because you can restructure it in real time. So what you see right in front of you may not be in front of you. It's just important to you.
Right.
And Fetch to establish this by looking at the kind of value exchanges that go on in order to customize the world for the individual. And that's super important for different emerging marketplaces, because we can look at these things and spontaneously create connections around agents that are likely to want to talk to each other. And that can be adjusted and changed in real time with no prior exposure to those kind of markets. And that's also really exciting, because sometimes it's not the obvious things that are interesting. It's the non-obvious stuff, the stuff that nobody predicted and nobody thought about. And you want those to be able to emerge out of the system.
Right. No kidding. It's almost like it's teaching itself as it goes into an ecosystem, learns it, then implements and executes. Is there any room for error with this technology? Like, is there any errors that you see, or as it keeps learning? Like, how does that work?
Actually, errors are not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
One of the things, for example, is when we're trying to work out how which agent might talk to another agent, we use all sorts of interesting technologies.
Right.
And one of them is called an embedding. And what it is effectively a dimensional collapse, where you can you look at the operations and the actions that two different agents performed, and you can position them in space without knowing anything about all of this stuff. And then if they're close together, the chances are they're related. But any dimensional collapse can have errors. An example I'd use is if you took the planet Earth as a sphere and collapse it down to a disk, London and Sydney are now a lot closer than they should be.
Right.
That's an error, right? You've gone from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions, and you've lost that important piece of information. But actually, sometimes that kind of stuff is quite interesting, because that allows you to explore wild new opportunities of connecting things together that you hadn't tried. And we put all sorts of additional learning technologies on top of that, because as it happens, we know whether or not any of these predictions is actually of any value, because you can look at the permanent ledger and see if any value is exchanged as a result of it. If no value was exchanged, it probably was a mistake.
Right.
You can grade it out of the system and then it appears. But if, on the other hand, it introduced something interesting, you can reinforce it. So that works very well. And with regards to other errors, one of the things that's very interesting to note is Fetch and decentralized networks generally, but particularly in our context, they are actually a very large population of relatively simple things. Each computer on the network runs a piece of software, and there's lots of computers on the network all running the same software. So you haven't got one big, huge, massive piece of software. You've got lots of the same ones. Which makes it much more robust, because obviously the big great saying is the only code that's bug-free is the code you didn't write in the first place. But you can make great strides towards making things more reliable by writing less code.
Right.
And when you've got lots of people systems, you can take one out, you can put one in, and it's robust to failures that occur as a result of it. You see this all the time in biology, of course, because you've got bees in a bee's nest or ants. You can take a few ants out, you can add a few ants in. In the end, the whole thing is actually very stable and very reliable, because the complexity, the interesting stuff, is actually an emergent property of lots of simple things. And that approach to creating something that's robust and reliable is one of the things that decentralized networks do. And it's one of the things that Fetch does on a grand level, because we're also doing the same thing with intelligence and knowledge, of course, in that we're combining lots of little bits of knowledge together to produce an interesting collective intelligence.
Right. So I want you to walk me through this for a second, because again, talking about this technology, I want you to walk me through what does your day look like? I mean, dealing with some of these complex problems and how they're super robust. What does your average day look like being the CTO of this company? I mean, again, just trying to get context for my audience on the sake that a lot of this stuff seems like very techie-based problems that not the average mind, probably like myself, could solve. Like, what does your day look like? What kind of problems are you solving with this technology? Are you doing coding? Like, can you walk me through this again? Just building context.
Well, one of the things that is really fortunate is that we are surrounded in the most extraordinary team.
Right.
We have some of the greatest minds that are working on this stuff, working with us on Fetch. So, of course, the greatest part of being in a position like this is to have such extraordinary people around getting all of this done, working on all
Right.
bits and pieces and all of the innovations. There was a period of time over the summer where most of my day seemed to involve sitting in PowerPoint creating presentations, which
Right.
with that. But yeah, it's never a dull day, because when you're creating something like this, and when we're collectively building something that's converging so many interesting technologies, because this isn't just a decentralized ledger play. You know, this is something that combines that with artificial intelligence, machine learning,
Right.
agent-based stuff, digital worlds, and goodness knows how many other things to solve a really big problem.
Right.
So we're constantly looking at ways that we can innovate even further, new methods of doing all of this stuff. And actually, as you know, most of the learning about all of this stuff comes from doing. And when you
Right.
start
Absolutely.
building systems, you switch it all on for the first time, and you look at it, and you come up with great new ideas as to how you can do things differently and make things better.
Right.
And one of the things that's very important to us at the moment is looking at the applications of Fetch, and looking at all the different ways in which we can deploy it and where we can deploy it. And the problem with a network like this is that can do potentially anything, as you stand there scratching your head thinking, well, where on earth do you start? And there's a
Right.
critical mass problem as well, right? You can't just have an agent in California and an agent in London and one in Sydney. You know, the three of them is really not going to achieve very much. You need large scale in particular areas for that to
Right.
work. And this is why we working with all sorts of very interesting commercial partners and looking at building applications. And actually, we're discovering whole new applications of Fetch that we hadn't considered. Actually, an interesting one is we're doing some work in the hospitality area relating
Okay.
to hotels, and looking at optimizing things behind the scenes, but also looking at something we hadn't considered, which is customizing the user experiences and user interfaces for people using Fetch's predictive systems.
Wow.
Now, what's interesting about that is everybody knows if you've got an app that allows you to, say, order a drink in a hotel bar,
Right.
that every click you have to go through to get to the beer that you wanted is where you'll lose people.
Right.
Now, wouldn't it be nice if magically, given all of these prediction systems, given all this technology, if all of the component parts were represented with agents, that the moment you pick that thing up, the one option that you see right there in the middle of the screen is the one that you want?
Right. Is it
And
predictive?
yes, because it got the context. And
Right.
there's a difference. If you turn up in the hotel bar in the evening with a book yourself, then what you're likely to want is going to be very different to if you turned up with a bunch of friends and there's a football match on.
Right.
And understanding that context and using that to customize the user experience, and also to factor in all this other information that you might have, is a really cool way of changing the way in which we interact with machines generally.
Right. I think that's absolutely incredible. I mean, just thinking about that where you can literally go to a bar and then all of a sudden, bang, it knows exactly the context behind what you want. I mean, that's actually really wild. One of the things I want to ask you about this, because it's interesting, because it's complex. What are some of the roadblocks you're running into in terms of marketing and actually making it simplified so people understand it? So you obviously use a lot of these real life examples, they're practical, but what are you finding as a company, just trying to relate to just average people to say, here, this is a new technology. It's going to be a huge breakthrough in the modern world. Like you use the example that you just used with the bar, where all of a sudden you can show up and bang, they see a drink like that. Like, what are some of the roadblocks you find from a marketing point to communicate this to the masses in scale and get it bought in?
Yeah, in the end, I suspect that people will be using Fetch and gaining from Fetch long before they know what it is.
Right.
And actually, it'll be there in the background, transforming their lives, doing things. And we know we did have the same thing with the internet, and particularly the World
Right.
Wide Web. And the growth of that was truly spectacular. The way it
Right.
went from something that very few people knew to something that was fundamentally a part of our everyday lives. You know, I've got two hilariously funny books sit on my bookshelf. One is the 1994 Internet Yellow Pages, which is about that thick. and then followed by the 1995 Internet Yellow Pages, which was
Whoa.
absolutely massive. And they never made another one because, of course, they couldn't at that point. It had grown so quickly,
Right.
and it went from something that we couldn't live without very, very quickly. But so many people were gaining from the presence of the internet long before they realised that it was the internet that was providing that value to them. And now, of course, we know about it. So presenting something like Fetch can be tough.
Right. Yeah.
How it's going to solve all of these problems. But in the end, when you look at how our daily lives increasingly are juggling all these complexities, the fact that you might have 100 digital representatives of you running around on the network solving problems before you get to them is a really, really attractive concept. And the other one is that suddenly the value that you have, the utility value that you have with all your sensors and all your devices, suddenly is in your control, and you're the one seeing the value from those. And that's also a very powerful concept, that more of the control of your stuff falls into your lap.
Right.
And I think that works very well. And actually, when you look at things like energy networks, they're a great example of something that is pretty much a centralized exercise.
Right.
There are shifts occurring. And one of the things that's happening, particularly with electric cars, is suddenly there are these huge batteries that are storing power all over the network, and they're not effectively being used. And I'm thinking, why shouldn't I make my coffee in the morning from my neighbor's car?
Right. No kidding. Right.
Why shouldn't he effectively sell me the power I need to do that at a good price, because he's not using his car that day?
Yeah.
And the idea that your solar panels could charge up other people's cars and all these things could operate on a local level is actually kind of interesting.
It is.
Because also it's more robust. Unlike a largely centralized network with the big power stations all coming down to the individual consumers, when a lot of this stuff is managed on a local level, it's harder for it to fail. Because you've got much more or many more component parts involved in making it work. And that kind of stuff is really interesting because it fits with the way in which our lives and the infrastructure around us is changing, but also generates a new way of pushing value around. And if you put these autonomous digital entities, our agents, Fetch agents, inside them, then all of those appliances, storage devices, and generators will talk amongst themselves to solve this problem. You won't have to do anything.
Wow.
The fact that your car charges between 3 and 5 a.m. Rather than when you plugged it in is of no consequence to you, so long as it's charged enough for you to get to work.
Right.
And it's the same thing with a whole pile of your appliances. You don't care when they come on and off, particularly things like dishwashers. But wouldn't it be nice if they could do it at a rock bottom power price just because they negotiated it at 2 o'clock in the morning?
Right.
And these are the kind of things that where putting the power into the component parts, which is the thing that Fetch does. This is where it gets interesting because it's that collective knowledge, that collective intelligence, that collective ability for lots of simple things to work together, to work in a more effective way, but also to work without you having to worry about it, which is really, really nice.
It really is. I mean, does that ever intimidate you, though, that in behind the scenes that you have an AI feature working for you? They take, for instance, we'll use an example like Elon Musk, right? I was watching the Joe Rogan interview, and he says that it's almost moving so fast, like it's moving too fast that we might not even be able to keep control of it. Does that ever intimidate you, like working directly in this marketplace?
No, it doesn't intimidate
me. It doesn't at all. You're excited?
Actually, pretty much everything that's going on around us is going super, super fast.
Right.
And it has with all of this technology for quite some time. And human beings are, well, we're nothing if not a tad insecure about ourselves and our futures. We automatically assume the worst when it comes to artificial intelligence and digital intelligence, is that something terrible will happen and suddenly either no one will have any work or we'll wake up one morning in the Matrix and it'll be game over. But this is very much the stuff of science fiction, I suspect, and it's right to be cautious. Right. And that perspective that when you're creating new technologies and you're applying them super fast in areas, it's right to take care and it's right to be cautious. It's right to be observant. of the kind of things that might happen. But in the end, we are still, particularly in the case of Fetch, we're talking about a very large population of little bits that are combining to produce more complex stuff. And that's effectively a knowledge and information and predictions, the kind of stuff that all those agents need in order to be able to be put in contact with each other effectively. And it's that sort of search and discovery mechanism that we're putting on a world which is now optimized for digital entities to get stuff done. Because the current global network is terrible for machines to work on. I mean, absolutely terrible.
Right.
There's no geography that the machines can use. They can't explore a world. They can't get next to somebody. They can't find people in any practical way that makes sense. And one of the greatest problems in AI today is how is it that you create a model of the world around you in order to be able to interpret it? And this is a great problem for self-driving cars. And actually, all the individual components in the world, well, they know what they are, or they could know what they are. And that can potentially give you an alternate live view of the world that you can augment with the one that you're taking with sensors in order to a space that's far more interesting for machines to be able to get stuff done more safely and more reliably and certainly a lot faster.
Right. I'm even thinking about some of the innovations with this technology would be in the medical field as well, like just making things that much faster, being able to get information quicker. So primarily as a company, are you guys looking to start off, like obviously like anything, if you're going to scale it, you want to start off in a certain demographic. So Fetch AI, so you're from the United Kingdom. Is that where you guys are starting your project, or you're going to be obviously being that it's decentralized all over? Like where are you starting to pinpoint for when you guys go public and people can buy these tokens?
Well, firstly, of course, anything like this as decentralized network is a global thing.
Right.
Clearly, it makes a sentence a lot easier for us to interact with people that are very close to us, and we know our area, particularly across Europe. And a number of the partners we're working with across Europe are, in fact, global companies.
Right.
That gives us access to information and knowledge from all over the world, and that's very, very important. And we need to find these particular areas where we can get a large population of agents all working in an area, so that it starts to work and generate those predictions and that value that we need in order to generate a decent amount of value from all of this economic exchange that's taking place by all these agents. So it makes sense to start in these narrow areas, focused areas where we know that Fetch makes a difference, like the hospitality one I mentioned, and also for that matter in supply chains and logistics. It's a very, in the sense that a shipping container knows if it's empty or not, giving those individual components the ability to respond to problems and surprises is a really cool idea, because actually surprises are a big problem. And when the unexpected occurs, usually these things have to filter all the way up a hierarchy to somebody who can make a decision before it all comes down again. That takes time and costs money. And if you gave the power to the individual component to just solve the problem, then potentially you have something that's better utilization and far more effective. So we're working in all of these areas, and whilst a lot of it is taking place initially in Europe, as I said, global companies are working all over the place, and that's an important part of it. But also individuals, because this is a decentralized network. This is available for people to download the software and mess around with themselves. And just because we've thought of cool things to do on the network doesn't mean that those are the cool things to do on the network. Right. People have imaginations. They think of new ways of using a system like this in the same way that the people who created the Ethereum blockchain absolutely did not see CryptoKitties coming. Right. I'm looking forward to seeing what individuals will create, because what Fetch does is it gives that power to the individual to access all this knowledge and all these predictions without having to go via any large-scale centralized organization, and provides that information to everybody. So the kind of things that people will create, the kind of things that they'll attach agents to, and the value that might come out of that, that's really exciting. And I'm really looking forward to that. And it reminds me of the original when Apple did the App Store for the first time. The range of things that appeared out of nowhere from people's imagination simply because one person could do it again, without a team of 100 people and $20 million, was extraordinary. You think of the innovations that we got as a result of one person thinking, "Oh, I've got an idea," and then being able to do it. And with something like Fetch, it means that you'll think, oh, I've got an idea, and you'll be able to do it. And
Really?
that's
Yeah.
very, very exciting. And we've made the barrier to entry for developing agents really low. So you don't need necessarily even any programming experience. We've come up with ways of making it very, very easy to attach agents to things. But for those that do want to play around and come up with more amazing things, they can. And when you've got access to all of this information that's shared amongst everybody on the network, and this ability to have a network restructure itself to connect you to people who want your stuff, I mean, that's really exciting. So yeah, I can't wait to see what people do with it when they get the opportunity to play around.
Walk me through an example here for myself. So let's say, I have Fetch on my phone, or I have Fetch in my hands. Give me a practical example of how I could utilize that and work with the interface so that I could solve problems and things like that from just a first person standpoint.
Well, there's a bunch of things. One is hopefully a lot of the problems that you're having are going to be solved transparently in the background without you even
Right.
noticing. And maybe an agent will report that this thing's been done, this been saved, this problem has been dealt with for you, because that's kind of nice. Rather than you having to go out and find solutions to your problems, your representatives go out onto the world and get them for you. So at some point, one of the things that is changing is the way we interact with computers. The idea that in 30 years' time that the average person will even have a computer keyboard inside their houses is very unlikely.
Right.
We get better at being able to talk to machines in our own language, and they get better at being able to understand the context and interpret what we're saying. Then there'll be different ways you'll interact with them, and different ways that they will report information back to you, and that you will find solutions. But in the meanwhile, of course, when it comes to, say, a mobile app, for Fetch, then depending on the problems you have, then it's a window on the Fetch world for you. It's a window to see solutions to problems that you're having, and particularly these are the things that have a great number of moving parts, like transportation. I mean, it's a cracking example of one that it would be really lovely if the problems were solved and presented back to you. But also another way you see Fetch on a mobile app is creating your own agents. The idea that you can look at all the sensors and devices that you have on your mobile device and sort of drag and drop them into a central bit and then create an agent to press a button and deploy it onto the network is really cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah, it'll go out there as its own entity. It will have tokens to spend, and it can receive tokens when it delivers stuff. And you'll see all of these little agents that you're creating and how much value they're generating and where they're generating it from. And you can tweak them and change what they represent and fiddle around with them, and then collect all of that value into your own token wallet. So this is a really interesting way of customizing your interaction with the Fetch space. And we think that these representative agents, the ones that represent you and your preferences and what you like and what you want to do, are going to be really, really exciting, because those are the ones that potentially replace some or change the roles of some of the intermediaries that are in our lives right now, and bring these solutions directly to you rather than you having to go out and find them.
So the question I have for you, so some of my capitalistic friends would be asking, so potentially this technology literally can go out and make money for you in the marketplace. It's going out doing transactions. So the question I have for you, Toby, is how long before everybody's going to know what Fetch AI is? Being that you guys are somewhat in the beginning stages, how long do you think it's going to take for this technology to come through and, I would argue dominate the marketplace with some of the features and things it has?
Well, no, that's a multi-layered question, and probably has a multi-layered answer as well, which is when you look at something like, as we touched on earlier, the spectacular growth of the World Wide Web. Even when it was growing through the roof in the mid to back end of the 90s, there was still a substantial portion of people who had no idea what it was and couldn't see the point. I mean, it wasn't until other aspects of technology improved that it became useful to people generally. We needed broadband connections and high-speed connections. We needed the computing power to be able to do more at the user end. And also, we needed the ideas, the big breakthroughs, the thing that would attract people when they think, oh, do you know what? That's great. And then they get involved. And when you look at all the services that we have now young people growing up today, such as my kids, they grew up taking all this utterly for granted.
Right.
and I saw it appear. And I do feel that the decentralized ledger space, which incorporates everything related to blockchains and crypto this and crypto that, it's in the same sort of position that we're there with all of us believing in this space that it is going to fundamentally change the way we live our lives. And when it's applied right, it's going to change the way in which economic exchange takes place, that it gives the ability to shift power and control from the centers of the network to the individuals on the outside, and that it's inclusive. Anybody gets involved without having to get permission from anybody else, and that all the time the ownership of everything is with the individual. Those are exciting concepts, and if they're put together in the right way, it can transform lives across the world in all sorts of interesting ways. So from a perspective of when people will hear about all this stuff, everybody hears about crypto as a subject now, but usually not in a particularly wonderful way.
Right.
But that isn't to say that we hear about the negatives. You hear about this and that and whatever that's going on.
Right.
And we forget to draw parallels with our real lives. We think, oh yeah, all this terrible stuff happens in the crypto space, when in fact terrible stuff happens everywhere.
Right.
Sorts of spaces, but there's lots of amazing things happening in all these spaces as well. And with Fetch, I think that we're doing something very different. We're not just creating a value exchange mechanism. We're trying to bring the component parts of the economy to life and giving them authority to solve problems independently of human intervention. And that's an exciting concept. And over the coming year or two or three, that as the agent population in a world like that grows, the scope of things you can do with it will grow, and then increasingly touch people's lives as solutions are presented to them, and they have access to all of this potential global knowledge that hasn't been available to everybody before.
Wow. I think it's absolutely incredible. I'm excited. And the question I want to ask you then, just listening and learning about this subject in general, and I asked something similar earlier though. So when can I buy a Fetch token? Like when can I go into this marketplace and get, if I want more information, if I'm watching this interview, where can I get more information to keep up to date so I can download this app, or if I can get into this marketplace and be involved with the changes you guys are doing? How do I get involved as a consumer?
Right. Well, firstly, there's all sorts of things that you can do right now.
Okay.
Winding the clock forward, but the main network release, so the real whole Fetch system, will be available in the second half of next year.
Okay, okay.
There's a lot going on right now. So we do have quite a big private test network that's becoming less private and more inclusive, and we're allowing people to get involved in building things. We have released a whole pile of the code that we've built for this, so that it can be downloaded and looked at by developers and by those who want to experiment with it. But we've been increasingly more inclusive about and making it easier for people to build agents and be part of the network and get things done. So our website, fetch.ai, is the place to go for news. And of course, we've got a Telegram channel. And all of those are linked to, all of our social media is linked to from the top of the website. And come and get involved and come and talk to us, because we love interacting with the community and talking to people and getting ideas as to what we can do with this. And over the coming months, you'll be able to download our network participation app, which is the one I was talking about, which will allow you how all Fetch tokens let you own agents, see how they work in the real space, and you'll be able to watch the kind of value that they can generate.
Right.
So you can do stuff now, and that's just going to get better and better.
My last question for you, Toby, and excuse my ignorance on this, and this is just not being the most familiar with the crypto space. There's a token like this. People are going to ask, like, is it traded on Bittrex? Like, would we be able to go onto a network like Bittrex or one of those trading networks and purchase a token like that, or do I have that wrong? Sorry to ask.
No, and you would need a method to get hold of the token, and that means that there will have to be a mechanism by which you can do that, which means you would have to provide some of your currency and then receive Fetch tokens as a result. And you need to be able to, of course, reverse that process, because if you've got a whole pile of agents that are working for you and they're generating value, then sooner or later you want to take that value out and do something else with it.
Right.
And particularly from a utilization perspective, one of the things I was told many moons ago was that the problem with data is that it doesn't get up and sell itself.
Right.
with something like Fetch, suddenly it can get
It
obfuscated.
does now, yeah.
So that brings into play a huge amount of data that previously would never have been used for anything because the cost to exploit it exceeded its value. So when you've got all of that data running around, quite apart from the fact that it's interesting as to the scope of new problems you can solve with it, that means it's generating value for people.
Right.
And that value eventually needs to be moved around the economy. So yes, the short answer to your question is, of course, there will be methods by which you would do that.
Right, 100%. I want to just say to you, Toby, honestly, you guys have done a fantastic job in just trying to get the full scope and context behind this. I think, within the cryptocurrency space and let's just say Bitcoin in general, I think more people have to focus on these technologies, like the things you're presenting, rather than, get away from this idea that we have, oh, there's a skepticism. So just even talking to you now for the past half an hour, I think that's huge. Like you just see some of this stuff, I'm not going to lie to you, just as an ordinary consumer, it's almost hard to comprehend that, wow, it's going to take care of that many things within our lives. Like I said, what you're doing is absolutely incredible. I mean, you have a huge resume, over 30 years of experience, and I'm interested just to see in the next 5 years what's going to happen with this technology. To be honest, it's just it's almost hard to comprehend what you guys are doing right now.
Thank you. And it is an incredibly exciting space to be in. Joining
Right.
all of the amazing pieces of technology together and then seeing just what happens when you get all these bits and pieces, you put them together and extraordinary things emerge out of it that we hadn't even begun to imagine just a few years ago.
What's your advice? Just my last question to you. What's your advice for anyone right now, kind of on the outside? They're like, oh, they kind of look down on the space. Like, what's your advice to them to get involved, to get a better understanding of this? Like, do you have any advice to break through those barriers where they say, oh, the crypto skate or space is a scam or whatever? What's your advice on that?
With anything like this, the best advice is just to get started.
Get started.
There are some very get a small amount of the cryptocurrency, a tiny little bit of one of the ones you've heard of, like Bitcoin,
Right.
and just understand the space and gradually sneak into it.
Right.
An incredible place to be, but it's like any new subject. In the end, if you want to learn a new language, the best advice anybody could ever give you is just to be absorbed in it, surrounded in it, and just let it become more familiar to you. And with any subject, in the end, you have to start somewhere, and everybody's optimal starting position is going to be different.
Right.
So just get involved. Pick some things that you think are exciting in the space and follow them, and just let it grow around you.
Besides your Fetch AI site, is there any other sites where you can keep up to date on some great information for people out there watching this? Is there any specific sites that have great updates on crypto, Bitcoin, even Fetch AI? I'm going to put your website in, but is there any other sites that you utilize for great news that
Well,
have a perspective?
I think everybody has their sort of favorite sites, but
Right.
actually in many cases, a lot of this stuff are covered by other technology sites that
Right.
already be familiar with, because increasingly this kind of technology is finding its way into different applications, and increasingly it's more of a mainstream thing rather than something that is unique to itself.
Right.
And actually, I'm finding even on the main news sites now, there's increasing discussions about all of this stuff going on, and different opinions and different views of it. And, some of them are positive, some of them are negative, and some of them are just different views that you sort of think, oh, that's interesting, that's new, and it hasn't been
Right.
around before. And actually, I think the art of a piece of technology like this is, don't see it in isolation, because it doesn't exist in isolation. For us, it's a key part when we join it with other technologies that are also very exciting in generating something new. And it should be seen as an enabling technology that solves a problem that hadn't been solved before, which is how do you come up with one global data structure that you can agree on and a method of consensus to add to it when you don't know who you trust.
Right.
And that is one of the big problems with decentralization. You've got all these computers. How do you prevent bad people from doing bad things? That was the problem that the original Bitcoin paper, which incidentally is a cracking read and more accessible than you might imagine.
Right.
That was the problem that it's how to reach consensus on adding to a global data structure. They call it a ledger. It's that
Right.
final state that you all agreement on what it is. But being able to do that enables other kinds of applications. And for us, it was one of the things that enabled us to be able to build our decentralized digital world and build all this information for all these agents to be able to exist and get things done. So yeah, it shouldn't be seen in isolation. It's not an isolated technology, and it works very, very well when it's combined with all these other amazing things that people are
Right.
working on.
Absolutely. So I'm going to say to my audience right now, so if you want to get some more information on this, just in a general context, look up Fetch AI on Twitter, Facebook. Go to their website. It's https fetch.ai. Check out some of the stuff. Watch your video. I think that was actually a really good intro to give people some more kind of context on a video standpoint. But other than that, Toby, I want to say you've done an incredible job. I mean, like I said, I'm excited to see what's going to happen with this technology and how it's going to change our lives. Thank you
Thank
for
you very much.